King's Gambit's got many traps. The King's Gambit accepted, which is e4, e5, f4, and then pawn takes pawn. This is the King's Gambit accepted. It's very popular. The most common line for white is to play knight f3. The other popular line is bishop bishop 4. But in this case, white is going to play knight to c3. This is an interesting gambit, and white needs to develop quickly, otherwise he's down a pawn, and he's playing in an irregular opening, at least for controlling the center with the knight c3 instead of f3. Now black could play queen h4 check. Then the king would have to go to king e2, for example. It's not very good to play g3 because after pawn takes pawn, king's got to move. He can't take without losing a rook. And then queen to g4 is check. The knight tries to get in front, and then g2, and you're dropping a rook or a bishop, dropping a piece. So with queen h4, king e2, white's trying to escape in a different method with that. But in this case, black is throwing everything on the king side with g5, pushing the pawns on the king side. Now, it's possible that white could play something like h4. Black just continues the development with knight c3, and if pawn takes pawn, queen takes at g5, black's got a good game. So if we look at the g5 with this, white wants to continue development, so it's time to play knight f3, and he's now after this pawn here with this, so white is attacking the g5 pawn. Black can either ignore it and continue the development with something like bishop g7. White can then push the pawn on h4, and if black pushes the pawn, knight gets to g5, but then black can play f3 and get a good attack on the king side. So instead of bishop g7, more common is pushing the pawn to g4, attacking the knight, and white has to move his knight somewhere, so he goes forward with knight e5. This now allows white to control center, perhaps attack, sacrifice, get something going for his pawn. At this point, black can still continue with h5, attacking on the king side. White would normally develop the bishop c4 with trying to trap down here at the bishop f7 line with this. But black can continue with queen h4 check, king f1, and white's out of trouble. So after ne5 with this, strong would be queen h4 check, and now king really doesn't have anywhere to go. So for example, king e2, black will go d6, attacking that pawn on knight e5. Then the white can go knight d5, threatening the knight c7, forking king and rook, for example. Black can hold it with knight a6, so he holds the c7 square. And then white can try to trade off the queens with queen e1. And then after the exchange of the queens with this, black can play pawn takes knight, getting a good game that way. So instead of moving the king, white's going to play g3, but black's just going to take the pawn. Now, we have the same issue. If that pawn takes, it's a discovered attack on the king. So if we have something like king e2 for white, black still can play d6, attacking the knight in the center. Knight moves to c4, queen to f6, with the threat of queen to f2, and winning the game that way. So if we look at this position again with this, we would rather have something like queen to g4 and try to trade off, or get an attack on the queen side, or just hold so that he doesn't lose too much. Now if there's an exchange, in other words, if queen takes queen, the knight's going to take the queen for white. Black will play d6, and now he's developing his pawn, he's developing his bishop out, so he's attacking that knight. To avoid it, white would play knight e3. Black will take the pawn on h2. Rook will take. Black will play c6, get a good game that way. So he doesn't want to take, black doesn't want to take the queen. He thinks he's got a good attack with g2. Now g2 is in check, so you have to do something about that. Not very good would be a queen here to g3, because after the queen takes the queen and the pawn takes the queen, pawn for the black will take the rook and get a queen, and have an easy game with this. So what happens now is after the queen takes the queen, we're going to have black get the queen back by taking the rook. And now with queen on h1 with this, he's got his queen back. White's now looking at a queen h5, trying to come down here and mate at queen f7. Black plays knight h6, that holds that square, so that's safe right now. So we're looking at that, and it's no good to take because now the bishop would take the queen. So you would have a move like knight to d5 instead, trying to go for the knight takes pawn at c7, forking king and rook. Well, we can do a counterplay. Black can try a bishop e7, attacking the queen, but the queen goes to f4, again threatening queen takes pawn at f7. Black can play d6, forcing the knight going to f7, but now black has bishop h3 and threatened to take queen takes bishop and trade off, and black can hold. So at this point, black plays knight a6 to hold so that knight doesn't take at c7. So if white tries knight f7, the king takes the knight. White can play queen h5 check. King then goes into king g7. Another check. King f7, and we got a draw. So there's nothing going to happen with that type of move with this. So white wants to try to win this game. He's up materially, so he'll play something like d4 in the center with this. Alright, so now we're looking at the d4 for controlling the center and getting the pieces out. And now black makes a mistake of trying to go by developing the bishop e7 and attacking the queen, and that's no good at all. Black should probably try something like c6. The knight for white would go to knight f6. Knight will exchange. Queen will exchange. Queen takes pawn check. And after king f2, it's at least it's okay for black. So another possible move is d6 right away. The knight taking at f7. Black plays c6, attacking the other knight. White then can play queen h5 for a discovered attack if he moves his knight. Black will go queen takes at e4 check. White will put something in front like bishop e3. It's held by the knight. And then black can now go queen to g6 and try to trade off with that way. Another thing that black could try would be bishop to d6, in which case we still take the knight that white does at f7. The king takes at f7. Queen plays queen h5. King moves to king g7. Bishop h6 check. The knight will take. Queen will go to g5 and have a good game. But the mistake at this point is this. Bishop e7 attacking the queen. Now white has a nice play by simply sacrificing his queen and play queen takes bishop at e7 check. Well, the knight take is the only move. The king can't move, so the knight takes at e7. Now white plays knight f6. He's got two choices, king f8 or king d8. If you play king f8, bishop h6 checkmate. And the other move that was played in this game was king d8, and now you check with knight f7. So this game was actually played in 1874 by Taylor and then in England. So it was a very good trap for white.